October 7, 2023. The air inside the Montclair estate was still, heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and unfinished wine, the kind of silence that shouldn't exist in a house that grand, a place where money could buy anything except peace. The clock on the marble fireplace read 2:47 a.m. when the call came in. A woman was dead. Detective Ryan Carter arrived at the scene just minutes after the first responders. The gates to the sprawling mansion were wide open, an unsettling contrast to the horror waiting inside. A body lay sprawled on the bedroom floor, delicate fingers curled inwards, golden hair spread around her like a broken halo. Blood, thick and dark, pooled beneath her silk nightgown, staining the cream-colored carpet. A shattered wine glass lay nearby, a deep gash across her temple suggesting it had been the first blow but not the last. Her name was Evelyn Harrington, wife of multimillionaire investment mogul Daniel Harrington, 34 years old, beautiful, adored by many, and now dead. Daniel Harrington stood by the window, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden frame, knuckles white. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his entire body tense like a man holding onto the last thread of his sanity. When Detective Ryan Carter called his name, he didn't move at first. "I found her like this," Daniel Harrington murmured, his voice hoarse. She was already gone. The officers exchanged glances. It was a line they had heard too many times before. A man finds his wife dead in their own home. No sign of forced entry, no sign of a robbery gone wrong, the only suspect standing right in front of them. Detective Ryan Carter crouched beside, the body taking in the scene. The bruises along Evelyn Harrington's arms suggested a struggle, but the position of her body, the angle of the blood spatter, it was all too clean, too perfect. Like someone had taken their time making sure. Everything looked a certain way. "Did you call anyone before us?" Detective Ryan Carter asked, watching Daniel Harrington carefully. A pause, just long enough to matter. "No," Daniel Harrington said. I was in shock." Detective Ryan Carter studied him, noting the slight tremble in his fingers. Not grief, something else. Fear. The paramedics confirmed what they already knew. Evelyn Harrington was gone. Time of death. Estimated between midnight and 2 a.m. Daniel Harrington was taken in for questioning. His lawyer arrived before he even stepped into the interrogation room. A man like him knew the rules of the game. But what Daniel Harrington didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Evelyn Harrington's death was just the beginning. Somewhere, buried beneath the layers of their picture-perfect marriage, a secret was waiting to be uncovered. Daniel. Harrington sat in the cold, windowless interrogation room, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a point beyond the walls. The sleek metal table between him and Detective Ryan Carter carried the weight of the night's events. The smell of coffee and burnt-out nerves clung to the air. Across from him, his lawyer, Philip Westwood, remained impassive. His presence, a silent warning that every word spoken would be calculated, measured. Daniel Harrington had built an empire on control, but here, in this room, it was slipping through his fingers. Detective Ryan Carter leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Let's talk about your marriage." Daniel Harrington's expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched slightly against the tabletop. "What about it?" Detective Ryan Carter studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the slight hitch in his breath. "Tell me about Evelyn Harrington, about the last few months." Daniel Harrington exhaled through his nose, measured, deliberate. "It was fine." "Fine?" Detective Ryan Carter repeated. "That's not what I've been hearing." Silence stretched between them, a quiet war of control. Then, finally, Daniel Harrington's mask cracked just slightly. His jaw tightened. The vein at his temple pulsed. Evelyn was different lately, distant, distracted. Detective Ryan Carter watched him carefully. "Distant how?" Daniel Harrington hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "She was always on her phone, always had somewhere to be, but when I asked, she brushed it off." His voice darkened. "I knew something was wrong." Detective Ryan Carter leaned back, tapping a pen against his notepad. You ever think she was cheating? On you! The words hung in the air like a slow-moving blade. Daniel Harrington's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, something raw. Philip Westwood shifted slightly, placing a hand on Daniel Harrington's arm. My client isn't answering hypothetical questions. Detective. Ryan Carter ignored him, keeping his gaze locked on Daniel Harrington. Your house is wired with security cameras, but the footage from the hallway outside your bedroom is missing. You want to explain that? Daniel Harrington's grip tightened on the edge of the table. I don't know what happened to it. Detective. Ryan Carter studied him, letting the silence stretch, waiting for him to break. But Daniel Harrington had spent years in boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar deals. He knew how to hold his ground, but Detective Ryan Carter had something Daniel Harrington didn't: the truth. Because while Daniel Harrington sat in that cold, sterile room, trying to keep his composure, a different scene was unfolding elsewhere. Rachel Monroe, Evelyn Harrington's best friend, sat in her apartment across town, staring at her phone screen, her hands shaking. The last message Evelyn Harrington had sent her replayed in her mind, over and over again. I have to tell you something, but not over the phone. If anything happens to me, check the lake house. Rachel Monroe swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had ignored the message at first, thinking Evelyn Harrington was being dramatic. But now, with Evelyn Harrington dead, those words felt like a whisper from the grave. Something was waiting at the lake house, and Rachel Monroe was going to find out what. Rachel Monroe gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the cold leather. The road leading to the Harringtons' lake house was slick with rain, the headlights of her car barely cutting through the thick fog hanging over the water. The text message Evelyn Harrington had sent before her death played in her mind like a broken record. If anything happens to me, check the lake house. Rachel Monroe had tried convincing herself it was nothing, just Evelyn Harrington being dramatic. But now, with Evelyn Harrington lying in a morgue, that message felt like a scream from the grave. She pulled into the driveway, the house standing eerily silent against the backdrop of the dark lake. The place had always been their escape, a private getaway away from the eyes of the elite social circles they moved in. But now it felt different, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Rachel Monroe hesitated before stepping out, scanning the property. The air smelled damp, mixed with pine and something metallic. Her fingers trembled as she pushed open the front door, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. She had expected darkness, emptiness, a place frozen in time. Instead, a single lamp was on in the living room. Someone had been here recently. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside, every sound amplified, the rain tapping against the windows, the floorboards shifting beneath her feet. The house looked untouched, but something was off. The cushions on the couch were slightly askew, a cabinet door in the kitchen half open, like someone had been looking for something. She moved toward the bedroom, her pulse pounding. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open slowly, her breath hitching at what she saw. Papers were scattered across the desk, a laptop still open, the screen casting a faint glow in the dim room. But it was the photographs that stopped her cold. Spread across the bed were pictures, dozens of them. Evelyn Harrington, with someone who wasn't Daniel Harrington, a man. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, a face Rachel Monroe had never seen before. A lover, an accomplice. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them, the timestamps in the corner revealing they were taken in secret. Someone had been watching Evelyn Harrington. The sound of a floorboard creaking behind her made Rachel Monroe whip around, her heart slamming against her ribs. The shadows in the hallway shifted. She wasn't alone. The lamp flickered. A whisper of movement. Then the lights cut out. The house plunged into darkness. Rachel Monroe's breath caught as a presence moved closer. She reached for her phone, fumbling with trembling fingers. The flashlight flared to life, cutting through the blackness, just in time to see a figure disappearing through the back door. She didn't think. She ran after them, her feet pounding against the wet ground, the rain drenching her as she chased, the shadow disappearing into the trees. But by the time she reached the dock, all she saw were ripples in the lake. Whoever had been in that house was gone, and they had left something behind for her to find. She turned back toward the house, her pulse still racing, her mind spinning. The photographs, the missing security footage, Evelyn Harrington's warning. Someone had been following Evelyn Harrington, and now they were watching Rachel Monroe too. Rachel Monroe sat in her car outside the police station, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through the photographs again. The man in the pictures was unfamiliar, but the intimacy between him and Evelyn Harrington was undeniable. The timestamps didn't lie. These weren't casual meetings. This was an affair, a secret Evelyn Harrington had been hiding from everyone. And someone had been watching, documenting every stolen moment. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Had Evelyn Harrington known? Had she sensed the eyes following her before it was too late? Rachel Monroe exhaled sharply and stepped out of the car. She had no choice now. The police needed to see this. She pushed open the heavy doors of the station, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. Detective Ryan Carter stood near his desk, flipping through case files, but when he looked up and saw her face, his expression hardened. "You found something," Detective Ryan Carter said, his voice edged with urgency. Rachel Monroe didn't waste time. She pulled the envelope from her bag and spread the photographs across his desk. "Evelyn Harrington was having an affair," Rachel Monroe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And someone knew." Detective Ryan Carter scanned the images, his jaw tightening. "Who is he?" Rachel Monroe shook her head. "I don't know, but someone was following them, taking these pictures. And tonight when I went to the lake house, I wasn't alone. Someone was there watching me." Detective Ryan Carter's eyes snapped up. "Did you see them?" Rachel Monroe swallowed hard. "Not clearly, but they left in a hurry. And they left these behind." Detective Ryan Carter rubbed his temple, processing the information. "If someone was stalking Evelyn Harrington, that changes everything." He reached for his phone. "We need to find out who this man is." As Detective Ryan Carter made a call, Rachel Monroe sank into a chair, her thoughts racing. If Evelyn Harrington had been cheating on Daniel Harrington, it gave him a clear motive. But was it really that simple? The sound of hurried footsteps snapped Rachel Monroe out of her thoughts. Another detective approached Detective Ryan Carter, his face pale. "You're going to want to see this," he said, sliding a file onto the desk. Detective Ryan Carter flipped it open, his eyes narrowing. Rachel Monroe leaned in, her stomach twisting as she read the words on the page. The man in the photographs had a name, a history, and a connection that no one had expected. He wasn't just Evelyn Harrington's lover, he was Daniel Harrington's business partner. Rachel Monroe felt her breath hitch. "Daniel Harrington knew," she whispered. Detective Ryan Carter exhaled, his fingers tightening around the file. "And that means we're not just looking at a crime of passion." Rachel Monroe's mind raced. If Daniel Harrington had found out his wife was sleeping with his business partner, what had he done next? A new question twisted in her gut, darker than the rest. Was Evelyn Harrington killed because of love, or because of something far more dangerous? Daniel Harrington sat in his dimly lit study, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting beside him, the amber liquid untouched for hours. The room, once a place of power and control, now felt suffocating. The walls, the expensive bookshelves, the perfectly arranged paintings, all closing in on him. The weight of Evelyn Harrington's death pressed against his chest like an iron fist. He had told himself he was ready for whatever came next. But now, as the investigation spiraled out of his control, doubt began to seep in. Detective Ryan Carter had returned to the mansion earlier that evening, this time with more questions, ones Daniel Harrington wasn't prepared to answer. Who was the man in the photographs? When had Daniel Harrington found out? Where was he the night his wife died? Daniel Harrington had answered carefully, his lawyer sitting beside him, shielding him from saying too much. But the moment Detective Ryan Carter had placed the pictures on the table, something inside him had shifted. The betrayal was old, but the anger was fresh. Evelyn Harrington had destroyed everything. Daniel Harrington clenched his jaw, gripping the edge of the desk. He had known about the affair for weeks. He had known, but he hadn't killed her. That was the truth. Or at least, that was what he told himself. But that night, the night Evelyn Harrington died, his memory was a blur of whiskey, rage, and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. Across the city, Rachel Monroe sat in the police station, staring at a board covered in evidence, the crime scene photos, the missing security footage, the photographs of Evelyn Harrington with the man who should have never been in her life. And now a phone record that changed everything. Detective Ryan Carter entered the room, his expression unreadable. He placed a file in front of her and opened it. Daniel Harrington wasn't the only one who knew about the affair, he said, sliding a piece of paper toward her. Rachel Monroe's pulse quickened as she read the records. A burner phone, multiple calls, sent to Evelyn Harrington in the weeks leading up to her murder. Rachel Monroe swallowed hard. Who was calling her? Detective Ryan Carter's voice was low. The last call came from a number linked to Daniel Harrington's business partner, the man in the photographs. Rachel Monroe's breath caught. He was warning her. Detective Ryan Carter nodded. Or threatening her. The realization hit hard. The affair had been dangerous, but not for the reasons everyone assumed. Evelyn Harrington hadn't just been cheating. She had been caught in something much bigger, a secret, a deal gone wrong. A betrayal that went beyond the boundaries of marriage. And then, as Rachel Monroe's mind raced, the final piece of the puzzle slid into place. The missing security footage. Detective Ryan Carter turned toward his computer, typing rapidly. If the footage was erased, it means someone didn't want us to see who entered that house the night Evelyn Harrington died. The screen loaded. A recovered fragment of footage from an outside street camera, a grainy figure, barely visible in the darkness, entering through the back gate of the mansion hours before Evelyn Harrington was found dead. Rachel Monroe leaned forward, her breath catching. The figure wasn't Daniel Harrington. It was someone else, someone no one had suspected. The screen flickered, the image sharpened, and then Rachel Monroe saw the face. Her stomach dropped. She knew who it was. Rachel Monroe's breath hitched as the image on the screen sharpened, revealing the face of the person who had entered the Harrington mansion the night Evelyn Harrington died. Her hands clenched into fists, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. It wasn't Daniel Harrington. It wasn't even his business partner. It was Margaret Pierce. Detective Ryan Carter stared at the screen, his face unreadable. Evelyn Harrington's assistant, he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. She was in the house that night. Rachel Monroe's mind spun. Margaret Pierce had been Evelyn Harrington's closest confidant, the one who had scheduled her meetings, handled her private affairs, and knew every detail of her life. Evelyn Harrington had trusted her. And yet there she was, walking into the mansion hours before Evelyn Harrington's body was found. Detective Ryan Carter's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up phone records. He exhaled sharply. Margaret Pierce called Daniel Harrington's business partner 5 times in the last week. Rachel Monroe's stomach twisted. She knew about the affair, she whispered. She wasn't just Evelyn Harrington's assistant, she was working for them. Detective Ryan Carter nodded slowly. The business partner was covering something up. Evelyn Harrington must have found out. Maybe she threatened to expose them. And Margaret Pierce, Rachel Monroe finished the sentence, was sent to silence her. The pieces were falling into place. The missing security footage, the erased calls, the way Evelyn Harrington had seemed so distant in the weeks before her death. She had been scared. She had known she was being watched. Rachel Monroe's heart pounded as Detective Ryan Carter grabbed his keys. We need to find Margaret Pierce now. The drive to Margaret Pierce's apartment was a blur of flashing sirens and screeching tires. Rachel Monroe's fingers dug into her palms as she replayed every conversation she had ever had with Margaret Pierce. The friendly smiles, the gentle reassurances, all of it had been a lie. By the time they reached the apartment, the front door was ajar. A terrible sense of dread filled the air. They were too late. Rachel Monroe and Detective Ryan Carter stepped inside cautiously, weapons drawn. The apartment was dark, the air thick with the smell of stale perfume and something else. Something metallic. Margaret Pierce lay sprawled on the living room floor, a single bullet wound in her temple. A gun lay beside her hand. The walls were covered in papers, documents, bank statements, records of hidden transactions linked to Daniel Harrington's business partner. A confession, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Rachel Monroe's chest tightened. "She was the loose end," she whispered. "They got to her before we could." Detective Ryan Carter's jaw clenched. "Or she knew it was only a matter of time before we did." Rachel Monroe's eyes fell on a single piece of paper resting on the coffee table. Evelyn Harrington's name, a list of dates, meetings, one word scrawled at the bottom: eliminate. The air in the room turned suffocating. This had never been about love, about revenge, about a husband betrayed. Evelyn Harrington had uncovered something much bigger, something dangerous, and someone had made sure she never got the chance to talk. Rachel. Monroe turned to Detective Ryan Carter. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. Detective Ryan Carter nodded, his gaze dark. "No," he agreed. "It's just the beginning. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more stories about betrayal, revenge and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Stay tuned for more real-life crime tales that will leave you questioning the truth. And remember, the truth is always stranger than fiction. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comment section.